sort of out of Nuova came I think germinated some of the seeds of, Cumulus a little bit later, of course, after the sale, and you were at Cisco for a little bit, JR. And I know even Nolan, some of your experience on the operator side, with your startup informed your view of networking from the user of networking, not just the builder of networking equipment and infrastructure.
Yeah. So I'd left Nuova about a few weeks or maybe a month or two before the Cisco acquisition. So I've never actually worked for Cisco, but I'd left to do a distributed storage. Yeah. I'd left to do a distributed storage startup, and so that obviously involves a lot of east-west traffic, because the idea was to put the storage on the same nodes running the hypervisors, so now they're all talking to each other at high rates. And I'd kind of been exposed to all of my experience with networking historically had been virtualization related, so VMware style, or on the open source side with Xen and KVM, the Linux bridge and Linux routing and IP tables and all these things. And so I knew that the capability was there. And then when I saw how things were done, in the traditional networking world, I was kind of struck by the complexity of it. Now, to be fair, some of that complexity is because it has a significant feature set, but also some of that complexity is just because of the evolution. And what I needed here for the distributed storage was actually just simplicity and bandwidth. I didn't need any of the unessential complexity, obviously, and I didn't even need a lot of the kind of feature-related complexity. All I needed was just fast bits moving back and forth.
And that was sort of resonated when you guys started talking, JR, about, based on some of your experience at Google and, the Nuova experience, on the sort of opportunity that you saw to get Cumulus started?
Yeah, well, it was pretty clear to me that even back at Cisco before I went to Google, and which was one of the reasons I went to Google, is the endpoints, the hosts, the servers, as it were, had a substantial amount of processing power. And what I would watch is, at Cisco, I was on the vetting committee for a lot of the acquisitions, and I'd watch us go look at a network services company that would have some great big hardware appliance that they invested in. And it was always super cool technically. Oh wow, I can't believe you guys did this, great idea, blah, blah, blah. And then when you go back and talk to the team after the fact, you found that appliance, that super cool appliance, ended up in one of two problems. One of them was customer bought it and used 5% of its physical capacity, or customer needed 20 times its physical capacity, so it had to scale out. And what you start to recognize is that when you have these endpoints, you use x86 servers that can scale almost to infinity, problems start to fall into ranges where you can put them on endpoints that are super programmatic, and you need to connect these endpoints in really malleable ways. And that's how Google and the Amazons, all these guys build their networks, is they have really big, high-capacity networks and lots of kind of reasonably generic endpoints that they put applications on to solve their problems. We're seeing that now starting to become commercialized through companies like VMware with their NSX product line. They're taking a lot of those same tenets and allowing them, putting it in the hands of enterprise customers. But you could see that that's where the world was heading. And in that world, people needed super high capacity networking, super easy to deploy, just to lay out by itself. And also had to be super easy to integrate with other systems. So for instance, we integrate with OpenStack partners. We at Cumulus integrate with VMware and other, we're starting to work on some work with Nutanix and some of the Hadoop providers. And what it does is it makes each of those use cases really easy to stand up for the customers. And you could just, when we saw this 5 years ago and said, this is where the world's heading, let's help it get there.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think, there's sort of, I always think about Cumulus kind of in two angles, right? One is the, disaggregation of hardware and software, changing the, the networking supply chain and networking consumption model, which is in and of itself, incredibly disruptive. But I think in the long run, even the bigger opportunity, right, is sort of changing the operational model, the way these networks are built and operated. Can you talk about, now that you've had product in the market for a while, kind of what you've seen on that front?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the biggest piece is just integrating and unifying the kind of virtual switching layer and then the kind of physical switching layer, because now it's it's Linux everywhere, and that's powerful, right? Because people already know how to manage, they already know how to monitor, they already know how to deploy Linux. So now you only have to figure out how to do this stuff once.
Do you mean, like, I saw the research you guys did with VMware on like elephant flow detection and like communication between the vSwitch and your switches running Cumulus Linux?
Yeah, the interesting part about that is, it showed that you can do all kinds of really cool things.
Yeah.
The silicon already, there was somebody, Ivan, I can't ever pronounce his name, Ivan P.
Right.
wrote a blog post on this, and he was spot on that, the silicon supports this stuff. We did some pretty simple things in the network switch, not rocket science. The hypervisor did some slightly interesting things, again, not really rocket science. And lo and behold, the customer gets great result.
Yeah.
And so it's really, it wasn't about how we as Cumulus can do tightly coupled things with someone like VMware, but it's more about how you have these very loosely coupled relationships between elements, and you get great results out of that loose coupling.
Yeah.
You mentioned the supply chain. Our observation around the supply chain is really about when customers want capacity, they want to be able to acquire the best capacity at the best price point they can get that makes sense for how they acquire it, right? So it's not so much that we have to feel compelled that the hardware and software have to be separate, but what we observed is almost every time we look around, it makes a lot of sense for the customer for it to end up that way.
Yeah.
On the integration sides of things, we have story after story where we've had a partner come along. Nolan was involved in S-Flow integration with a company called Inmon recently. They came to us and said, hey, we have customers that, we're joint customers and they're asking for S-Flow integration. And we said, okay, let's do it. So Nolan worked with their engineer, they
cool.
noodled something out, and then it was QA'd and shipped, and it was like a 6-week problem or something like that.
Yeah, and I had other things going on. I mean, the great thing about the way we did this, where it's just Linux, is they already had a tool that they run on Linux servers in case the network doesn't support S-Flow. They can at least get samples and visibility at the server. You just took that same tool and dropped it on the switch, and we had to add a tiny bit of functionality to enable the sampling up from the chip up to their tool, but we didn't actually end up having to write any S-Flow code.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was less the next step that we took and more the next step that the partner took. Once they had this capability, they have their own collector that takes this S-Flow data and can make decisions based on that. And so what they ended up doing is very similar to the VMware elephant and mice flows. That they wanted to do the same capability of preventing large data transfers from increasing latency for other traffic.
Yeah.
So they detected the large flows using the S-Flow samples and then wrote a small Python program, a little server that they run on the switch. And their collector reaches out to that and tells it to treat these flows specially. And the cool thing about that is they went off and did this. We essentially empowered them to design and build this solution involving our switch without even, we didn't even know about it until it was done.
Are there other interesting third-party, tools or integrations? I know you've been working with some of the automation players, some of the, StatsD graphite type of monitoring and graphing tools. What's, one of the more interesting ones that comes to mind for you guys?
For me, it's not so much more interesting as the pace in which we're able to work with each of these companies is actually incredibly surprising to me. We sit down and we'll talk with an Ansible or the ops code people that are responsible for Shep or Puppet Labs, or CF Engines, Mark Burgess and those guys. In each one of these cases, we've sat down with them, told them about the environment. Because it's Linux, it's just native. It's innate to these people. They understand how we work, how to think about us, how to work with us. And so the pace in which we're able to get technology into customers' hands is phenomenal.
Yeah.
We have a customer, big financial, that uses CF Engine for all of their orchestration. And we're at the point now where with CF Engine you can orchestrate the bring up and monitoring and promise theory around a big IP routed network. So between us and the CF Engine teams, they got that all complete and done and up and working. Other networking incumbents don't even understand why this is interesting. And so the customers out there, beating on their current suppliers and saying, hey, these other chumps over here in East San Jose figured this out. Why can't you guys figure it out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Chef in particular, on the theme of kind of empowering partners and customers to just do things on their own without having to come to us.
Yeah.
Our second customer ever, so we were in full-on crazy startup mode. Customer asks, we use Chef to manage our servers. Is that going to work on the switches? And I was like, yeah.
Right.
And they tried it and it worked, which was good because we'd never tried it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And so when you're talking to customers, how do you sort of articulate, what Cumulus is, which is, a true hardware accelerated Linux distribution with kind of what Arista positions as?
And that's always an interesting one. The Arista team's a really good team, lots of smart people involved in the company there. And what you start to find is certain customers really, really get it at an innate level. Yeah. And those customers you don't have to talk to about. We have a customer right now that's converting away from Arista to Cumulus. And this particular guy, he just raves. It's so much easier to automate around Cumulus because it's Linux. When we already understand how it works and integrates with all the tools.
Yeah.
There's no special weird kernel stuff. It's all super straightforward. anybody that doesn't understand it at a visceral level, you can say anything you want, and they're not really going to believe you. So, but that's when we get to go back to the other discussions. You know, we're not just about OpEx. We're also, there's CapEx advantages, there's supply chain advantages. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that we offer to customers outside of Arista, which make us a better choice.
You know, kind of coming towards the, you know, home stretch here, you know, as you're thinking about, you know, your experiences both in terms of, you know, founding Cumulus, as well as, you know, you guys have both been involved in some, you know, pretty seminal networking, you know, technology companies in Silicon Valley over the past, you know, 15, 20 years. You know, what's kind of the lesson learned or some advice you'd have for, you know, the next generation of, you know, technology-oriented kind of upstarts or young technologists?
Definitely be excited about technology, and if you're not excited about the technology you're working on, go find something else.
Yeah.
That's the number one.
We at Cumulus have been super lucky in that if you look at our seed round investors, our A round investors, our B round investors, at every stage we had people that we trusted to give us advice and were interested in not only us as people, but the technology that we're bringing to market. So it makes for really good guidance and conversations. Doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with us every time. It doesn't necessarily mean we agree with their disagreement every time. But we can have solid, well-grounded, respectful conversations. And I think that's super important to have people around you that you can bounce ideas off of that you trust.
Yeah, and you trust us despite walking out on the bill that first time. But yeah, I think, you know, that's something that not all entrepreneurs, you know, understand the, you know, kind of the board dynamic. You know, it's really, you work with a firm, but you work with people, and how important that dynamic and a healthy dynamic is, you know, in a startup, to have those, you know, kind of challenging conversations that go in both directions, is, you know, definitely something to consider when, you know, choosing partners. So, and it goes both ways, right? We're doing due diligence on, you know, Cumulus or other startups as an investment, and, you know, an entrepreneur should be doing due diligence on the, you know, venture capitalists that they're, you know, potentially going to be working with. So it's a two-way street. Well, I want to really thank you guys for coming and doing this today. It was a lot of fun. I learned a little bit about, you know, digital audio and, you know, the early days of fast Ethernet, which is cool. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.